Hi, I'm Laura Kasowitz with Hartford Stitch. Thanks for joining me. Today you're going to learn how to put together an e-pattern. An e-pattern is any pattern that you download offline. They're great because it's instant gratification, but the downside is you do have to do a little assembly before you can cut into your fabric. Today we're using the Fancy Tiger Craft 1 hour top pattern. It's a pattern that we use in our Intro to Knits class, so if you're taking that class you can kind of follow along and have it all set by the time class starts.
Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is download your 1 hour top or whatever pattern you're using from the website. Now often if you click download, your particular browser may open it up in that browser and give you print options from there. I don't suggest doing that because it doesn't give you all the print functionality that downloading it and opening it with, say, Adobe Reader will give you. And it's really important that you're able to customize how you print this pattern. So I open mine in Adobe Reader. If you use a Mac, Preview also works really well. So you don't need to print these first few pages unless you want to, but in an effort to save paper, you want to start printing where the pattern pieces actually start. So for this pattern, it's page 5. So open your print dialog box. Just start with page 5. Now here's the most important element of printing e-patterns is that you don't want it to scale when it prints. So when the designers make these patterns, they're making them with very specific dimensions in mind, and that might go outside of the printable area of your printer. So when your computer receives the command to print it, it wants to shrink everything down so that it fits inside a printable area. But that will skew, of course, the dimensions of the pattern and make it so it doesn't fit very well. So if you look right here, it says size options. You want to click actual size. I think when I do preview, I write scaling 100%. Some applications have it where you just write no scaling, but you want to make sure it's not changing the size of the paper, the printing area at all. So once you hit actual size, you want to hit print. Now the reason that I just chose page 5, you'll see a box 1 inch by 1 inch, and this is put in there by the designer so that you can double check that your print settings are correct. So print page 5 first, and then measure that 1 inch by 1 inch square to make sure that it's actually 1 inch by 1 inch. And if it is, and when it is, you can go back and print pages 5 through 22, or probably 6 through 22, assuming it's all correct. Hit print, and you're good to go.
Now that you have your pattern downloaded, you want to gather the rest of your tools. To start with, you're going to need something to cut your paper. I like using one of these Fisker's cutting tools that I got at a craft store. You can also use paper scissors or a paper rotary cutter. And of course, if you're using a rotary cutter, you want to make sure you have a good ruler and a self-healing cutting mat. Now, if you're wondering why I'm specifying a paper scissors or paper rotary cutter, there's nothing particularly special about them, except that they're only used for paper. If you've ever taken one of my classes, you know that I'm a real stickler for this. The moment you start cutting paper with scissors or a rotary cutter, it dulls the blade so much that it makes it really difficult to cut fabric with. So just keep your paper cutting tools separate from your fabric cutting tools. Next thing you need is clear tape. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. In fact, you don't want it to be anything fancy because you are going to use a lot of it. I use about a 300-yard roll, probably a 300-foot roll per project. So I just get mine. It's like a 2-pack at the dollar store. So once you have your cutting tool and you have your tape, we can get started assembling the pattern.
Okay, so now you have all your pages printed and it's time to start assembling them. So take a look at your first pattern page. So this is page 5. Hopefully you've already measured the square 1 inch by 1 inch, and so you know that you've printed it out at the right size. There's a couple important things to take a look at here. First is the assembly guide. So every e-pattern should have one of these, and it's just how the designer wants you to lay out the pattern pieces, the pages rather, to make the pattern pieces. So this one is 3 squares by 6 squares. There's 18 pieces, so it's not too many pieces, and there's only 2 pattern pieces within it, so it's pretty simple, but it's nice to have this little reference to look back at. The next thing to take a look at are these little triangles here. So this one has a 1 in it, and this one has an A in it. If you look at your second pattern piece, you'll see that this one also has a 1 in it. So the ones and the ones match up together to make a diamond. However, as you can see, getting in the way of them making a perfect match are these borders. So that's why we have our scissors or our paper cutter, because we need to start getting rid of the borders in order to make everything match up perfectly. So take your first and second paper and your cutting implement, your scissors or your paper cutter, and you want to cut off that border right at the line. Now it's important to be as accurate as possible with this, as it's going to make a real difference when you put the pattern pieces together. So for page number 2, you're just going to cut off the left hand margin. Save your time, don't cut off anything more than you need to. So the left hand margin will be enough. Now I'm ripping a very small piece of tape here. It's tempting to rip off long strips to tape the entire paper together, but start with small pieces so that you have a chance to kind of maneuver the pages around as you assemble the whole thing. So you want to put together the 1 triangles until they make a diamond and get them right up there close to each other. Before you put your little piece of tape down, look at any pattern lines and make sure that they match up as well, and then put just a little piece of tape connecting the two. Alright, so once that's done, you take your next pattern piece, so the 2 and the 2, you cut off the left hand border, and you can cut off all the borders ahead of time if you want. I like to do it one by one, just find that going nice and slow and methodically keeps me on track here. And again, with a small piece of tape that doesn't want to rip off, line those up, double check the pattern lines match up as well, and then put a small piece of tape. And you're going to continue this way for the rest of the row. Alright, so now I've assembled the entire row. You can see these pages are a little bit wiggly, so you want to be careful with them as you put on the next pieces. Set this one in your point of view. Okay, all right, so for the second row, you're going to look for the pattern piece that has the A. The A is going to match with the A. For the first page of the second row, just cut off the top border. And using a little piece of tape, match up those triangles and that pattern piece line and tape it together. All right, so then you want to take the next page. So the 6s and the 6s match up, as well as the B's and the B's. So now for all the subsequent pages of this row, you're going to cut off the top border and the left border. All right. And place 2 pieces of tape, one at the top and one on the side. All right, so now we're also getting a little more stability in our pattern here. So complete that for the rest of the row, doing the same thing, cutting the top off and cutting the bottom off. I'm sorry, the top and the left side. Okay, so now I've assembled all 18 pieces of the top. Everything is matching up. I've double checked all of my pattern lines. The order looks like the assembly guide that was on page 5. So now you really want to use your tape. Do about 10-inch long strips
And you want to tape down, oh, I got a curl up here. You want to tape down all of those seams. Now it's tempting just to let it go like this. Leave it as is. As you can see, what I just did there, even with little bits of tape all over, this isn't the most stable pattern. I really like to trace off patterns. I highly suggest it to all of my students. So again, it's tempting just to cut out your size on here. But let's say you cut out your size and you think you're a size extra large. You cut it out, you bring it to class, we make the extra large, and you realize that that is not your size, that you really should be in the medium to large pattern size, or that you want to bring the neckline down a little lower, or the sleeves a little shorter or longer. Instead of having to assemble all of this over again, if you've traced off your pattern, you can just trace off and make the changes that you need. And because of that, you want it all taped together because it makes it easier to store and for the next time you're going to use it. So go ahead and tape all the seams, again with like 8-10 inch strips of tape. So now I have my pattern completely assembled, everything's taped down, and we're good to go. Like I said before, I really strongly suggest tracing off your pattern pieces and not just cutting them directly from the paper. I like to use medical exam paper. You can buy it on Amazon. I'll put a link in the notes for that product. It's billed as exam table paper, but if you read the reviews, everybody uses it as pattern paper. So just trace it off. When I'm done cutting out my pattern pieces from the tissue, I just put them on top of this printed pattern, roll up the printed pattern into a tube, and then tie it with a piece of yarn, or more frequently I use a strip of fabric from the project. So if I sew the 1 hour top in a gray sweatshirt material, I just take a strip of the gray sweatshirt material to tie it up, and it's a great visual reminder when I'm sifting through the dozens of e-patterns that I have assembled. Okay, last time I made the 1 hour top, I used a gray sweatshirt. This must be the one it is. It makes life a little bit easier. I found that this way, doing it this way keeps the pattern in the best condition, so that the next time you're ready to sew this pattern, it's ready to go. You don't have to reassemble anything. All right, so I hope this answers your questions on how to assemble an e-pattern. Really appreciate you joining me today, and I look forward to sewing with you.